what are the technical areas? So purchasing and other areas are technical areas. Internal audit process, the vouching, the data analytics, internal audit workflow, the documentation and evidence retention, all of this is a part of internal audit processes. How does internal audit perform? How do you go to the management and say that, look, I am coming after 15 days. There's a plan of internal audit calendar. That's a process that you follow. You circulate that at the beginning of the year. And then 1 month before or 15 days before the actual audit start, the scheduled start, you will send to the management a requisition of asking management to give all the required information. Please keep this ready. I'm coming. And the management will keep it ready. Please give me all this data up front. Management will keep it ready. What kind of process do you follow? That's very, very important. Compliance with IIA standards. And when I say IIA standards, there are two parts to it. Of course, one is IPPF, which is International Professional Practices Framework. And the second one is the Standards of Internal Audit issued by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, which is presently a recommendatory standard. Standards on internal audit are recommendatory standards, and therefore those are also important, because I'm sure when you comply with some of these standards, naturally you become more disciplined, your approach becomes more sharp, you tend to become more professional, and you tend to become more focused, and your outcomes would be different. So if you basically are making sure that all of the six components, and if you really look at it, think about something else that you need for internal audit to be successful. I don't think that there is anything else at a structural level which is needed to make an internal audit successful. You need board attention. If you have all of this and you don't have a board attention, you'll still fail. Because the board doesn't believe in you. Because the board doesn't believe in importance of internal audit. And therefore, even if you have got all of this, it won't help. So you have got board oversight assessment, very important. If you don't have the right people, you're gone. If you don't have a proper structure of internal audit, you're gone. If you don't have a cross-functional engagement, you'll not be enough effective. If you're not complying with the IIA standards, you are not adequately disciplined and process-oriented yourself. You're not following proper quality. And if you don't have a proper technical areas and process assessment, then again, you'll not be able to justice to individual areas of work. Therefore, to be effective, and therefore, to have a business context thinking, to have a risk-based thinking, to be able to know enough about business, and to be able to draw enough attention towards improvement, it is essential that we have a thinking towards internal audit, effectiveness, and quality assessment. Again, one case study which is very important here. And this case study involved, I'll not get into much details, but this case study involved in one of the, so this is an internal auditor who is an Indian and who is employed by a biggest sugar factory in Africa, let's say. That sugar factory had an internal audit department which had about 40 people and an internal audit head, managers and senior managers and then executives and so on. They went for a quality assessment of an internal audit function. And in a very objective and quantifiable manner, they scored each of the parameters which I just mentioned, the 6 areas which I just mentioned. So they scored how much does a IA process technical assessment score, how much does compliance element score, how much does a people skill component score, how much does a board oversight score, how much does a IA structure score, how much does a cross-functional engagement score. And the scores were, out of a certain scale, the scores were, the actual scores were 11 out of 30 in IA technical process assessment, 4.2 out of 15, 6 out of 20, and so on and so forth. So out of 100, they scored about 31. So even at a board level, the score was very less. It's hidden because I have just put an illustrative here. Score was very less. So this internal audit assessor, quality assessor, went back and they told the board, look, your score is very less because you are not giving enough oversight to this function. While the skills of the internal audit department is only 6 out of 20. So they are not skillful any which ways, but you are also not giving enough attention on the 6 fronts. And I would just like to give you an example here. If I were to take a process and technical assessment area, so this was a sugar plantation and a sugar manufacturing biggest factory in Africa. Basically what was required to be done, what they did. So they went by every line item of audit scope. You know, people in Africa and people in India, today Africa, more than 60-70% of Africa is ruled by whom? Any clue? Indians, absolutely. Which are some of the biggest business houses in Africa? Most of them are Indians. How has that happened? Because about 200 years, 100 years back, many of our people in Gujarati, Sindhi, Marwadi family, and so many others, they went to Africa to settle down, to build the railway lines from, let's say, from Uganda to Kenya, from Mombasa to Kenya, and so on. Many of these Indians were eaten up by tigers. So this was because we had very difficult situation certain number of years back in India, and they were able to move, of course, because it was also a English territory. So it was very easy to move at that point in time, and people moved. Today, after 3 and 4, 5 generations, some of these Indians are the biggest business tycoons of Africa. However, you will still have people in Africa, the local people who will be doing the audit. It's a highly underdeveloped continent in the world. You've got an internal audit head which is an Indian. You've got maybe 1 or 2 managers who are Indian or somewhere from Europe or somewhere else. But you still have people who are doing internal audit at the ground level. And mind you, many people who are coming and doing an audit there, 40-45% of the total population in many countries in Africa are suffering from AIDS. Those are the people who are doing internal audit for you. How will you become effective in that environment? And then, it is very simple. It is very simple. It went back to saying that, okay, shows the scope of work. Each and every item of scope of work was examined. Typically, I think it's an enough point for us also to understand here. When we drop a scope of work and a checklist, does it adequately guide the auditor in terms of how much sample do you need to take? What exactly is the element to check? Do you have enough procedures to be able to guide that in a form of checklist or in the scope of work? Very, very sharp, because by reading that, okay, you say one line item of the scope would be do a comparative code analysis. Comparative code analysis. That is not enough. You have to tell exactly what to pick up, what to check, what kind of checks to do. So when you do a comparative code analysis, you say only 3 codes. But in there, the 2 or 3 of the codes, all of them have come from the same vendor from different entities. Those are the kind of checks which need to be done. Do you guide that enough in the scope of work? That's a very important point. So what we are saying is inadequate internal audit risk context. The risk, all of the risk was not known to the auditor, therefore the scope was not made properly. The second is the procedures, the verifiability and documentation. So he said, okay, comparative code analysis done. We went back and asked, okay, show us where you have done it. Show us the documentation. We did it. We have not maintained documentation. We did it. So there is no verifiability. There is no documentation, because you need to follow. If you are doing an audit yourself, you're telling people that you maintain documents. Why would you not maintain the documents of the work done by you? So verifiability was important. And the third element was look at the observation, outcomes. So the observations were also, drafted in a very loose manner, very, very loose manner. So a very important assessment there. Scope coverage. So you made score of 5 out of 15. Checklist, you made a score of 4 out of 15. Documentation and verifiability, you made a score of 2 out of 15, and so on and so forth. You made a score of 23 as against 100. For procurement function. For inventory function, you made a score of 31 out of 100. This is a tactical areas assessment. You are doing an audit of risk context. You're doing a review of risk context, whether the scope is properly made, risk is properly known by the auditor, whether the procedures are followed properly, whether the assessment of findings is proper. So you're doing on 3 important fronts. So by and large, we went and back and said, look, your rate benchmarking or market intelligence. I gave you an example of one of the airlines where the market benchmarking led you to a revenue increase of 5% at least. You gave a number of 175 crores. That was through a benchmarking. Why would you not go back and do a rate, the rate at which you are buying from a particular vendor, why would you not go out and do a market intelligence of that rate? What are the other suppliers? What is a low cost supplier in the market? And by doing this, I would give you one more example. For a large courier company, which was providing courier services to our client, one of the auditors went back and asked the courier company, okay, just by calling it through market intelligence and say that, look, we have these couriers and we want to supply certain elements from one place to the other. What are your rates? Of course, a very dummy ID was created of a very dummy business organization, and sent an email and called over the phone and said, I am so and so, I am so and so, gave him a business card, said, please come to our office, please let's discuss the rate and all of that. And that rate, the internal audit was paid certain amount of fees. The management was not increasing the size of the fees for last 2 years. And when they did this exercise, through a rate benchmarking exercise for just this one supplier, where they were paying about, in an annualized manner, they were paying about, you can say about 5 to 6 crores to a courier company, they were able to save about 70 lakhs rupees. Whereas the audit fees of an internal auditor was only 35 lakhs. They said that, look, we did the rate benchmarking for you, call these guys into your office, renegotiate the rates, they have given us these rates, this is the email, now you go back. Nobody, that courier company, nor anybody else could really know, it was just one of the business inquiries. They never knew that, okay, something like this could, somebody from the company, the internal auditor of the company can go back and check the rates. So the rates were renegotiated, 70 lakhs worth of cost savings, and the fees of the internal audit got increased from 35 to 45 lakhs straight away. Anyways, it's not for fees. I'm only saying that you have been able to bring enough value to the table by doing market intelligence. So there are these elements which were actually missing. One second, sir. So there were these elements which were actually missing in the procurement function audit. So there was not market intelligence, there was no vendor performance management, there was no emergency procurement. Emergency procurements happened. You said that I will not follow limits when emergency procurements happen. But were the approvals being checked for emergency approvals? At least for emergency, if Mr. Bakliwal was my boss, I would at least go back and say that, Mr. Bakliwal, please approve it. How much time does it take over a WhatsApp? Is there a process of emergency procurement approval? No. Did that approvals happen? At least one approval. Nothing happened. So that was an important element. Like this, we said that, okay, these are the elements and these are the business objectives. The first objective is economic procurement, EP. Every element of scope, we mapped it back to the business objective. There is economic procurement, there is right quantity buying, there is litigation liability, there is authorized payment, there is right quantity, there is timely procurement. These are the business objectives. So these were the scope inadequate risk context or scope inadequacies which were found out. And this is one sort of case study. Moving on, I'll not go into each of the slides. I'll move to the next important element, which is changing the business trends. We've got 10 more minutes, right? 10 minutes? Half an hour. So then there is changing trends. What are the changing trends in internal audit? Internal audit of decision making. I gave an example, go, no-go decisions. Why did you take this project? You shouldn't have taken this project. Measuring the value, that is value meter. This is where the internal auditor will give to the management, look, this is the value added by us, value meter. Each and every observation has got certain value. And I'll show you how does that get measured. Because every work that an internal audit does should be enough measured and presented to the audit committee, should be enough measured and presented to the board. The next changing trend is the power of data analytics. Are you leveraging that enough? There are ready scripts of audit data analytics like ACL, like IDEA, like so many other programming softwares, like SAP scripts, for example, which picks up the data from SAP and does the data analytics for you. And the last portion there is changing trend is changing expectations of the share stakeholders. Changing expectations of the stakeholders. So, if all of this is done enough by an internal auditor, he will be able to meet the changing expectations of the stakeholders. Board of directors have an expectation. Management has got an expectation. Regulators have an expectation from internal audit. Companies Act Section 138 very clearly articulates the scope of internal audit. Yes or no? Does it articulate the scope of internal audit? Section 138, gentlemen there. It tells that the scope of work has to be drawn up by the board of directors. It is not given in the Companies Act. It cannot say that, right? Every business will have a different scope. But there is a section on internal audit. Until now, internal auditors had only one regulatory provision, which was in CARO. Now we have Section 138 mandating it, one full section. So while Companies Act have got compacted from some 600 sections earlier into certain less number of sections, there was no provision in the Act earlier in internal audit. Now we have got one full dedicated section in the Companies Act, Section 138 on internal audit. And it says that internal audit has to be done by a chartered accountant or a cost accountant or the firm of chartered accountants or a firm of cost accountants or such other professionals as may be prescribed by the board. So there's whole one section. Therefore, there is a regulatory need for an internal audit in the Companies Act itself. We had SEBI mandating internal audit for mutual funds, IRDA mandating internal audit for insurance companies, and therefore RBI mandating internal audit for banks. So there is a very different changing trends which we have. And it's important to meet the changing trends. So you had a question. You had a question.